Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. And we're looking at Donald Trump's talk of vote rigging ahead of November 8th presidential election in the United States. This in the wake of that third and final debate in Las Vegas on Wednesday. We're doing so in the company of historian Julian Zelizer, who joins us from Princeton University in New Jersey, attorney James Lacey, author of Taxifornia, and a California delegate for Donald Trump at the Republican Convention, who joins us from Los Angeles. Welcome back, and welcome back as well to blogger Jean-Pierre Larochelle, director of the Political Forum. You heard Donald Trump raise the specter that the fix could be on. Here's how his rival responded during the debate.
The FBI conducted a year-long investigation into my emails. They concluded there was no case. He said the FBI was rigged. He lost the Iowa caucus. He lost the Wisconsin primary. He said the Republican primary was rigged against him. Then Trump University gets sued for fraud and racketeering. He claims the court system and the federal judge is rigged against him. There was even a time when he didn't get an Emmy for his TV program 3 years in a row, and he started tweeting that the Emmys were rigged against him.
Should have gotten it.
This is a mindset. This is how Donald thinks.
All right, should have gotten it. You heard Donald Trump's words, Jean-Pierre Larochelle. Besides being a funny joke, which it is,
yes,
and he sniggers at it,
right,
it offers him plausible deniability. He's very good in that way because you're never quite sure.
Exactly. He always tries to leave this room that he was joking. I think the main thing is, both sides in typical campaigns engage in dirty ops. But the key is that the candidate is supposed to stay above the fray, and all these lower type arguments are made by surrogates and other people. And what's different about this election is Donald Trump, as the candidate, is willing to say the outrageous things that are supposed to be reserved for Newt Gingrich and the surrogates and Sarah Palin and others to do. So he's taking over their role, basically.
Taking over their role, but Barack Obama has weighed in on this. On Tuesday, in the company of the Italian Prime Minister, he told Trump to stop whining.
I have never seen in my lifetime or in modern political history any presidential candidate trying to discredit the elections and the election process before votes have even taken place. It's unprecedented. It happens to be based on no facts.
Zelizer, is it unprecedented?
Well, it's not totally unprecedented. In 2008, John McCain made some similar statements in October before the campaign in relation to Acorn, a controversy that emerged over a voting registration organization. And he also said that great fraud would be perpetrated on the public. But in terms of scale and scope, this wasn't the major theme of McCain's campaign, and it wasn't reiterated with the same kind of intensity that Donald Trump has done. So I do think it's unprecedented. Again, we've had post-election contests, and that is true. There's been struggles over recounts. But to make it the closing argument of the campaign is something different than what we've seen before.
James Lacey, what's your response when you hear Barack Obama talk about an attempt to discredit the elections and the election process?
Well, I mean, I think that it's just hyperbole by Obama, who wants to have a continuation of his legacy by electing Hillary Clinton. But, although Obama is hanging in there and has essentially the same positive and negative rating, about 50-50, 80% of the American public, depending upon what poll you look, some say 70, some say 85, but 80% of the American public are angry. They're dissatisfied with their federal government. And there's a reason for that. Taxes are too high. National security is in jeopardy. Our military is falling down. Obamacare has been a disaster. I'm a small business person, and my premiums have gone through the roof for lesser coverage.
Right, but we're hearing the President of the United States talking about undermining, democracy, basically. Is Donald Trump undermining democracy with his statements?
These issues have gotten voters so angry that they're responding to Donald Trump, and they're responding to the issues that Donald Trump is bringing forth. And by the way, the USC LA Times poll that came out just yesterday doesn't show Trump behind. it shows them in a virtual dead heat. In the state of Ohio, even now, after what some would have said were a bad couple of weeks for Donald Trump, he's ahead, and that's a very important swing state. In every single poll in Ohio, he's ahead. So this is still a tight race. But you know, what's unusual is the president getting involved in the election, and I think your historian will agree with me. You have to go way back to 1960 to see Ike Eisenhower coming in very lightly at the end of the election campaign to help his vice president, Richard Nixon. Most presidents stay out of the political fray, but Barack Obama is a hyper-political president, and in this, I think he is a polarizing figure.
All right, let's just broaden this out a little bit. You suggest that that there's a virtual dead heat. A poll of polls that was conducted by Real Clear Politics gives Clinton a 6.5-point lead in the popular vote. However, this is important to stress because oftentimes in the newsroom we have to explain it to people who aren't Americans. It's the Electoral College, a state by state, that decides the election. And the U.S., so it's an Electoral College that will decide ultimately, but it doesn't have one person, one vote. It's state by state. The votes, though, don't count the same in those Electoral College. This is Slate's map of the United States from 2012 of how much vote counts. Now, the average electoral vote represents 436,000 people, but the number rises and falls per state depending on the state's population over 18 years of age. So one electoral vote from Wyoming really represents 142,000 people, while at the other end of the spectrum, New York State has 519,000 people per electoral vote. When we talk about the fix being in, it's not the fix as such, but it is a strange system for us here in Europe because it's not one person, one vote.
Not at all. In fact, it's really a battle for just those key states, because there's a whole series of states that more or less are geared for one party or the other.
Is that democratic?
Well, that's the whole question. I mean, it clearly goes against the principle of one man, one vote. But I do want to say one thing very quickly about I find it a little rich for Barack Obama to be talking about an unprecedented election, not only for the reason about his active involvement that was brought up earlier, but by the fact that he endorsed a candidate who was still under a pending federal criminal investigation, which is also clearly unprecedented, and was campaigning with this person, and that his own head of the Department of Justice met with the spouse of the target of that investigation. So, I mean, for him to start talking about unprecedented in addition to everything else is just really beyond the pale.
All right, we're talking about historical precedents, but let me just go about this with Julian Selitzer. The fact that you have this American system, which is a bit intricate, voting doesn't take place the same day when it's the primaries. The votes are cast in different fashions. There's 31 states that already have early voting, others don't. Should the United States have a more modern approach to voting?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a separate question from the rigged system. There's many aspects of our electoral process, not just the Electoral College, that people have debated, and there's many critics say need to be overhauled. The Electoral College, many people believe, gives too much weight to more thinly populated areas and smaller states. The campaign finance system, of course, which both parties have had debates about, skews a lot of the weight sometimes toward donors over voters. And there's many more problems. Political reform is a big issue. Both parties, you can argue, suffer from it. And I think there's need for that discussion. We have to remember, after the 2000 election, when the flaws of the Electoral College were as clear as possible, and it was just more of a discussion than it usually is, no reform came about it, even though there were commissions looking into it and recommendations made. It's very hard to get the United States to change any basic core part of its political system.
So is democracy being undermined in your view, Julian Selitzer?
No, I think there's benefits to the Electoral College. I do think there's problems with money in politics, and we need to have it reformed. So there are problems with our democracy, for sure. I've written about these, and I think reform is important and it's necessary. But the democracy still does work, and some of the uncertainty we've seen, frankly, in this 2016 election, whether you like the candidate or don't like him, or similarly with Bernie Sanders, shows there is actually room for more flux than we often think, and who comes out on top.
More room for more flux. And just let me ask you on that, what's the tone of the debate been on campus at Princeton where you are?
It's fair. I mean, Princeton's a more conservative campus, I'd say, overall than many other universities. I suspect there's a lot more support for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump, although support for Hillary Clinton is not so great either for young people. I mean, the campaign of the year that really animated the campus was Bernie Sanders. That's where students were excited. They were talking about the issues. They were engaged in the process. A lot of students I've talked to in the recent weeks are just actually turned off by the whole thing. Watching these kinds of debates and watching this kind of rhetoric is not very inspiring to many of them. So many are, I would say, probably by default going with Hillary Clinton, but not through their hearts, but more through their minds.
Yeah, surveys show Clinton solidly ahead in her mainstay support groups like blacks and the young people that Julian Zelitzer was describing, but she's no Barack Obama. This is a NBC News Wall Street Journal poll that came out this week. It shows those groups, if you look, less inclined in 2016 to go out and vote than they did 4 years ago. If campus enthusiasm is down in November, the Wall Street Journal writes, Mrs. Clinton and Democrats will likely take the bigger hit, given that younger voters skew Democratic. Could we have a surprise, Jean-Pierre Larochelle? Could the polls be wrong?
No, I think the polls are right, but there's still a potential for a surprise because there are still leaks coming out continually from WikiLeaks, and if one of those were to able to catch holds with the media, it's possible. The problem is it's clearly pointed out, the youth voted for Bernie Sanders during the primaries to such an extent that he got more votes than Hillary and Trump combined amongst the youth vote. And clearly there's not the enthusiasm in the Clinton support, and we see that in attendance rallies and elsewhere. And a lot of that vote is sort of an anti-Trump vote.
And we're seeing, James Lacey, the divisions that we've just highlighted within the Democratic Party, and of course the divisions within the Republican parties are also in plain sight. Why are the two main parties in such, I wouldn't say disarray, but are having such a hard time rallying around their candidates?
Well, in the case of the Republican Party, you have to remember that Donald Trump ran in a field of 17 candidates. And you had an awful lot of Republicans that were going from first choice to second choice to third choice by the time Donald Trump won the nomination. I was an early Trump supporter. That was never an issue for me. But there have been a lot of Republicans that have had to reluctantly come around to be able to support him. Now, the polling shows that Trump support among Republicans, as best as I can recall, is around 85%, which is pretty much where it is with Democrats supporting Hillary Clinton. But I do have to say that the negative tone of this campaign, I think, will have an effect, speaking as a political scientist myself and someone who makes his living at politics, I think it will have an effect on voter turnout. When this election campaign started, going back to last spring, there was a lot of discussion about how this is going to be one of the biggest voter turnouts ever because Donald Trump was energizing voters and Bernie Sanders was energizing voters. I think that we understand today that when there's negative campaigning, and Hillary Clinton is just as guilty as this as anybody else who's run this year, when there's a lot of negative campaigning, a lot of negative messages that go out, maybe my colleagues will agree with me, it does have the effect of suppressing vote. Now, if the voter turnout is down, it then turns on who has the most motivated group of voters. And there's no question that Donald Trump has a highly motivated group of voters that will get out there and vote for him no matter what. And in some of these swing states like North Carolina and Florida and Virginia, that's really going to make a difference.
Jean-Pierre La Rochelle, I see you nodding in agreement there.
Well, with the last part of the statement, but not the first part. So yeah, I do agree that Trump has a lot more enthusiasm among his supporters. But I think you raised an issue that there's a bigger fundamental problem with the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. There is a division. There's actually two different Republican parties, and we're seeing them starting to war each other. So you got these sort of establishment Republicans who are free traders, and then you have this new movement, which is
all right, so several Republican parties, several Democratic parties.
Two Democrats, I would say.
All right, but also, and this is a point we touched on in part one of our discussion.
Right.
Different media. The point being made, one side talks to the liberal media, the other side talks to the conservative media. And can we say ne'er the two shall meet? Is the space for common ground getting smaller and smaller?
That's what's happening because we've switched from basically broadcasting to this narrowcasting, and people more and more tend to be in this echo chamber where they're listening to people that agree with them, and so they keep hearing views that support their position. So it's getting harder and harder for people to switch, and it makes it harder to reach out to these undecided and middle voters. And Hillary Clinton at least makes that attempt to try to grab the middle ground, where really Donald Trump has been concentrating on his own supporters and keeps solidifying the base rather than reaching out to the middle.
Julian Selitzer, what are your thoughts on that? Because, you know, if you look at history, an election in any country, and it'll be the same here in France next spring, there'll be primaries where everybody will try to show their true blue credentials on either side. And then afterwards, there'll be the main election where you try to court independent, middle-of-the-road voters. What's happening in America?
Well, first, in terms of the divided parties, if I could just go to that, we've had, many periods the parties are deeply divided. In the 50s and 60s, the Democrats were divided between Southern Democrats who were very conservative on race and Northern liberals. And what you saw come out of all this gradually was a shift in power from one part of the party to the other. The Republicans went through the same, starting with the Goldwater campaign in '64, where gradually Reagan and a more conservative vision would be ascendant. I think because of polarization in the electorate, which is very strong and will probably create a floor of support for Donald Trump, even if he does lose, and the way that the media works, which is an echo chamber where I don't know if the media shapes how people think of things. I think it's more people just tune in to people who agree with what they have.
And would you agree, Julian, that technology is basically changing the election? The fact that now you have the internet, the fact that, there's electronic voting in some states, a lot of early voting, these accusations of hacking that have taken place. Technology, a big factor?
Well, it is changing, and in many ways, certainly with Twitter, it helps to fuel the polarization you're talking about. The thing is, right now, despite some outliers, Donald Trump isn't winning, and he's not doing well in the swing states. And overall, he's not winning in terms of the national polls, with a few outliers like the LA Times poll, which was conducted in unusual fashion. But the point being, I think he is actually trying a different kind of campaign.
Wow.
And so the point is he's trying a different kind of campaign, which is to play to the elements that you're talking about. And I don't know. If it doesn't work, I don't know if the next time around Republicans or Democrats would be willing to replicate.
Do you take James Lacey's point that his base is more energized than Hillary Clinton's?
For sure. Very passionate. I don't know who has bigger support, though. His base might be narrower when you add it all up, and that's maybe what we're seeing at the polls than Hillary Clinton. And you might have less enthusiastic voters who will still vote, but are willing to kind of follow the party line and see her as a stronger candidate. So just because he has a more passionate core, I'm not sure, and I don't think, frankly, that that's going to be enough for him to win.
James Lacey, it's an era where social media like Twitter act as a bullhorn, but just how much of a bullhorn?
Well, to step back a little bit, I mean, it's a terrific bullhorn for getting out your information to your core voters, and Donald Trump certainly has a very strong group of core voters. You can see that he gets 10, 15,000 people at these rallies. But when we talk about speaking to the middle, I think this is part of the argument that Trump makes about the system being rigged in this election, because in the past, you've had cable TV in the United States where you might have some stations that are more or less associated with the Republican Party. You have some stations that are associated with the Democratic Party. And then you have this broad swath of the traditional broadcast companies, ABC, NBC, CBS, public television. And those have been the media outlets that have kind of spoken to the middle, more or less speaking to America in general. But we know right now that that media, corporate media, is almost completely in the tank with Hillary Rodham Clinton. We've seen it in the WikiLeaks. We've seen it in the way that they actually have rigged the debates by giving the questions in advance to Hillary Rodham Clinton. So we do have this polarization going on that makes it very, very difficult to get a fair message to that swath of moderate voters who may very well be the people that swing the election one way or another. I have to say one more thing. This whole business about Donald Trump being behind in the polls just doesn't wash.
Okay.
We've already explained our Electoral College. I can give...
All right, let's not revisit that because we already had that conversation. But let me just ask you, Jean-Pierre Larochelle, a final
it's
point.
It's a close election.
Final point, and it could be a closer election than the polls suggest.
And don't forget, this has been a very bad 2 weeks for Donald Trump, so it's possible he could get a little.
There could be some readjusting. The final point on this is just because we're heading into an election cycle in this country. Are we seeing the same patterns?
I think globally we're seeing this pattern where there is a sort of resentment and rejection of the establishment, and it's the same thing that led to the Brexit vote, and that's why you've seen a lot of references made that the Donald Trump vote is sort of a Brexit type vote, and so I think there is this sort of general sentiment that maybe the experts, it's rigged, it's the establishment, and time to move on.
All right. I want to thank you, Jean-Pierre Larochelle. I want to thank James Lacey in Los Angeles, Julian Selitzer in Princeton, New Jersey. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. All right. And we say hello to James Creedon. Donald Trump, he does suck the air in the room when it comes to the best zingers. Although Hillary did get a few in, but tell us what you found.
All right, well, slogans. I mean, the social media, what's fodder for social networks is, of course, the slogans and various expressions. Now, he referred to bad hombre at one point, or
bad hombres.
Bad hombres, that's bad men, using the Spanish word hombre. And he was referring to, I suppose, illegal Mexican immigration, right? But in any case, that sentence has been picked up by a lot of Twitter users. It's even become, I think, a T-shirt.
That was fast.
It was fast. And of course, the thing is, a lot of so-called bad hombres actually can potentially vote. So this Vote Latino Twitter account is kind of being drawing attention to that they may indeed be going to the polls, as might the nasty women, because that was another remark that was made.
He called Hillary Clinton a nasty woman, yeah.
That's right. She was criticizing him on some point, and he whispered in, well, not whispered, he muttered into his microphone saying she's a nasty woman. And, well, that kind of played into Hillary Clinton's, I suppose, argument that he is a misogynist. Let's take a look at one clip of a video that was put together by Vox, where a lot of women's issues, such as being pro-choice, equal pay, all of those sort of issues that matter to many women are being linked, in fact, to the phrase nasty woman. And I think there's also a fragrance bad hombre. We might see that at the end of this particular video. But it was being used, I think, by many as a sort of a rallying cry to gather together criticism of...
So they had time to make a T-shirt and put together a video.
I don't know where people get the time to do all this, but they act pretty quickly online.
The news cycle is fast.
That's right. So look, essentially, now while some people did take the whole nasty woman thing seriously, they picked up on a point of criticism by Donald Trump of the Clinton Foundation and money taken from countries such as Saudi Arabia that don't have a very progressive treatment of women, to say the least. And so some people using the hashtag nasty woman to draw attention to that point of criticism made by Donald Trump. But look, this is how it's being sort of boiled down, and it's it's never particularly nuanced or deep as a kind of a point of analysis. But there you go, that's Twitter. Now moving on to the fact, this is I suppose what has been picked up by most of the media, and this is Fox News being somewhat clement, I think, saying that it was a strong night for Donald Trump, but the headline is his refusal to say he'll accept the election outcome. That was picked up by everyone immediately after the debate. It was the point of discussion across all of the networks. And this is one pro-Trump account saying, look, they're boiling it down to the bad hombres, the nasty woman, accepting the rigged election. Look, translation, Hillary lost. So you see, the thing is, people, if they're pro-Trump, they're going to be pro-Trump no matter what happens. And some do actually buy into this argument that the election is rigged, that Bernie Sanders, the Democratic primary was rigged, as there are suggestions, of course, from the WikiLeaks data that Bernie Sanders was not favoured in that process, to say the least. And so some people taking the whole rigged election claim actually quite seriously, but I think really it boils down to these two headlines in terms of the analysis. For the New York Times and for many media, this demonstrates contempt for democracy. It's actually potentially very dangerous. Post-election, it could completely divide the country. It could lead to potentially even to violence, right? But others who are pro-Trump say, look, essentially, this is rhetoric, and he will, you can count on him for a peaceful transition of power when the chips are down. Now,
there was a new word, by the way, added to the English language, I saw.
Bigly. So he said he's going to, I don't know what context to use it in this time, but he's used it not for the first time. And it led to a flurry of searches on social media as to whether or not it is a real word. He seems to have lucked out because it actually is a real word, but I don't know if he knew that. In any case, a lot of people were amused by that. He also used the expression a swatch of land. And a swatch, as far as I'm aware, is a Swiss watch. And I think what he was going for was swathe of land. This was in reference to Syrian refugees. But some people saying maybe he meant to say safe zone, and he just accidentally said swatch of land. He has, a colourful way of expressing himself, and some people were a little bit facetious. But look, he won, according to his supporters, no matter what happened.
All right.
He's the winner.
He's the winner. James Creedon, and
François.
Many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.